Welcome back to Forward Progress here on the Hammer Betting Network. Today, we're going to be talking about the NFL quarterback signings from this past week, how they're going to impact the teams moving forward, and what the betting markets now look like because of those signings. Rob Pizzola, joined by Fabian Sommer. Suma, big day, big week in the NFL. Lamar Jackson gets the tag, finally. It was kind of thought that this was going to happen. Baltimore gives him the non-exclusive franchise tag. So he will cost the Ravens $32 million in 2023. They have until July 17th to reach a multi-year extension with him. But in a weird turn of events, or just the non-exclusive tag, he's free to negotiate with other teams in free agency. If he signs an offer sheet from another team, the Ravens will have 5 days to match it, and they would get 2 first-round picks in return. Let's start with that. I feel like the 2 first-round picks in return is just going to essentially be a deal breaker for any other team at this point. I'm not sure what your thoughts are, but my belief in Lamar Jackson getting moved or being with another team now at this point is much smaller than it was a week ago.
I don't think that the 2 first-round picks are a deal breaker, but rather, at least it sounds like, is that Lamar Jackson has the, let's say, wish for a fully guaranteed contract.
Yes.
And it seems like there is some kind of collusion going on right now, where NFL owners got really mad at the Browns for giving Deshaun Watson that kind of fully guaranteed contract. And it seems like they are blackballing Lamar Jackson right now. Because, to be honest, when you told me yesterday that the Ravens are going to put the non-exclusive franchise tag on Lamar, I would have bet that there will be 3 or 4 offers already on his table in the evening, especially at the Falcons. The Falcons have the 3rd most cap space. They got an offense where they can plug and play Lamar Jackson easily. They have 2 great receivers, a decent run-blocking O-line. They have no quarterback on the roster outside of Desmond Ridder, so that would be a no-brainer, in my opinion, to go after Lamar Jackson. But I think there's just a situation right now where the league does not want to offer any fully guaranteed contracts, and they're probably assuming that this is what Lamar Jackson is willing to sign up for. Going back to the 2 first-round picks, I don't think that should be a big issue when you can get a franchise-type quarterback for Lamar Jackson, because Russell Wilson went for 2 firsts, 2 seconds, a 5th-round pick, and I think Shelby Harris and Noah Fant. And I would argue that Lamar Jackson right now is more valuable at age 26 or 25 than Russell Wilson at age 33. And it's also interesting that teams need to give up their own first-round picks. For example, if the Lions would make an offer for Lamar Jackson, they would not lose their 6th overall pick. So I think that the compensation is not a big issue, but I'm really, really surprised that teams are not trying to go hard after Lamar Jackson, especially the teams like the Falcons or the Lions, who could easily pay that contract and also front load it so that the Ravens cannot match it, because they would have a too big of a cap hit in 2023.
What do you make of the odds right now to win the AFC North? So this is courtesy of BetStamp, which you can download on your mobile app or check out the site betstamp.app. And we just have a line comparison here from 3 separate sportsbooks. But it feels to me like the Ravens are at this in-between number, so to speak, where, I mean, if you bet plus 275 and Lamar Jackson ends up signing a long-term extension with the Ravens, you're laughing at that point. But if it's plus 275 and Lamar Jackson ends up in another destination like Atlanta or Detroit, then they're probably going to drop, I would guess, to the worst number in the division, depending on who the starting quarterback is next year, or right in around that range. Do you think that there's anything to do with this type of market? What's your gut feeling in terms of whether or not Lamar Jackson starts a game for the Ravens next year?
My gut feeling is that it's a little bit higher than 50%, but I would still not rule out anything, because there are about 3 months now that another team can basically make him an offer. And I mean, so many things could happen actually. Like, there's also the opportunity that they cannot really get to a new contract in Baltimore, and he might be sitting out some games or whatever. I don't know. So right now the problem is that all the other prices are also correlated with the Ravens being in between. For example, if Lamar does go to the NFC, the Steelers odds would drop, the Browns odds would drop, and Ravens would go higher. And Ravens would probably have a first round pick where they can select a rookie quarterback or something like that. So really nothing to do there right now with the uncertainty, in my opinion.
Okay, we had one signing and two other re-signings this week. I'm going to start with the signing because I think there's applications from what we were just talking about with Lamar Jackson. So Derek Carr goes to the New Orleans Saints. He signs a 4-year deal, $150 million. $100 million of that is guaranteed. And we see the updated odds. New Orleans moved from about plus 220, best price in market, to plus 140 to win the NFC South, which I think is a fair move, just based off of the fact that they upgrade at quarterback. Personally, I don't like the move for the Saints altogether because that's a lot of guaranteed money for, in my opinion, a slightly above average quarterback when New Orleans, again, in my opinion, just does not have a Super Bowl caliber roster right now. And I think that this is the division, or if you're looking at like early futures markets for next year, where you could potentially find some value if we can get that Lamar Jackson to Atlanta type of trade, or Carolina acquires a quarterback where now all of a sudden I like Carolina's roster maybe a little bit better than New Orleans roster, and you can get them at plus 275. So I'm curious your thoughts on the Carr signing altogether, and if there's anything to do in the NFC South right now in terms of division winner.
To quote our friend Placebo Analytics, when there's uncertainty, you want to go with the highest odds. And I mean, the Bucks could still do some stuff at quarterback, even though I don't really like their overall roster, or at least where the roster is heading and their coaching staff. The Falcons with Lamar Jackson, I mean, what would they be, like top 3 NFC odds?
Yeah, I would say immediately overnight top 3.
Yeah, like maybe Philly's offense is still better in that case. Maybe the Niners, depending on who's quarterback. But I think you can make a strong case that the Falcons would be at near the top of the NFC, or of a weak NFC. Give me Frank Reich with a guy like CJ Stroud, who was supposed to be a plug and play quarterback in a great scheme who can distribute the ball. I would probably take them at those odds over New Orleans easily.
I think there's an upside with every other team in the NFC South because Carolina is likely going to find itself a quarterback. Now, honestly, if they do it through the draft and they do trade up in the draft, they probably have to surrender a guy like Brian Burns to do so, which is going to hurt their overall roster. I'm not so enthused on the Carolina odds, but Atlanta to me makes a lot of sense. Like, we saw Desmond Ridder play last year. Maybe they think they're too far away as a roster overall to compete this year, and they're not going to make the Lamar Jackson move. But I feel like there's upside with the Falcons at this price, considering what they might do here. Tampa Bay, I think there's just upside because they got rid of Byron Leftwich as their offensive coordinator. And who knows what happens now with a new look offense. Lenny Fournette got cut as well. So I think this is an interesting division altogether, but I don't think the Saints should have made this move. I get why they did it, but that's a lot of money. And I mean, they're not a competitor, in my opinion.
So the way that Andy Dalton has played last year, they're basically getting Dalton at a bigger price right now, I would argue. So Derek Carr is in the tier in that, let's say, 11 to 15 range, in my opinion. And Dalton last year at times played like that kind of quarterback. So I don't really think that the Saints are getting a huge upgrade, but they're also paying a quarterback like a lot of money now with a roster that is already in an absolute cap hell. And I just don't see how they're going to be like better than a 8 and 9 and 8 kind of team next year.
I agree. They do have an easy schedule next year based off of the last year's records, right? Which we don't know if that means easy schedule or not till we see the finalized rosters. But let's look at the NFC. So San Fran, Philly, obviously the two best teams. I think Dallas will probably take a step back overall. Detroit, yes, but they're good, but they still have a lot of holes on the roster that I'd like to see what they do in free agency to round those out completely. The rest of the teams New Orleans is lumped in with. Green Bay might trade Aaron Rodgers. The Rams, I mean, they're pretty depleted. They're going to get Matt Stafford back, and Cooper Kupp back. The Vikings coming off a pretty lucky year. Maybe the NFC is more up for grabs than I originally anticipated. With that said, I still think that there's just a huge gap between those top two teams and everyone else going into the season.
Yes, I would agree. I mean, if the Saints are going to be a let's say 8-9 and 8 team on paper with an easy schedule, they could easily grab a wildcard spot and easily grab the division win and probably lose against a better team in the playoffs. But just looking at the table, I mean, man, Falcons with Lamar Jackson, like easily ahead of Dallas.
I agree. Kyle Pitts would have a monster year.
Yeah,
just an absolute monster year. The two re-signings this week: Daniel Jones, 4 years, $160 million with the Giants. It's a lot of cheddar for Dan. Imagine before the start of last year, if someone told you that Daniel Jones was going to sign a 4-year, $160 million extension, I would have laughed them out of the room. In the same boat, the Seahawks re-signed Geno Smith, 3 years, $105 million. Do you like either of these moves for these teams?
I like the Geno Smith move a lot more than I do the Daniel Jones move because Geno Smith is basically a 2-year contract, basically front loaded without a big cap hit in 2023. So I think that when it comes to the draft, everything's on the table for the Seahawks. I think this is a contract that will not keep them away from picking a quarterback if someone falls into that lap. And I'm just thinking about Anthony Richardson, who supposedly needs to sit a year. Don't know if that's true or not, but at least that's what several people have been telling us since the combine. So Anthony Richardson would fit perfectly sitting behind Geno Smith for a year and then maybe start over. So I don't really hate that because the Seahawks needed to do something at quarterback, and now they have zero pressure at that position. They can enter next year in a weak division, and they will probably compete in that division, and they can still pick their quarterback. Daniel Jones, man, that's also a 2-year contract basically because I think that he will have 70 or 80 million guaranteed over the first 2 years. So the Giants will probably get out of that contract after 2 years without too much dead cap, but I still think that contract is not really justified. I like Daniel Jones in that scheme of Brian Dable, but I don't see the upside or the ceiling with him. The Giants might do something at wide receiver, even though we are looking at a very bad free agency class and probably the worst wide receiver class in the draft since 2018 or something. They have to do something there, but it's still that, in my opinion, capped ceiling with Daniel Jones. If you tell me that the Giants will be down 10 points in the wildcard round and then Daniel Jones really has to orchestrate a comeback from behind, I would not want that quarterback in that situation.
The one thing about Daniel Jones is that he's still only 25 years old. So you're going to get him through the prime years of his career right now on this contract. But the challenge I have is that the Giants are lacking talent in too many different places right now.
Yeah.
Wide receiving core, outside of left tackle, their offensive line was a disaster last year. They had tons of cornerback injuries where they're going to have to strengthen the secondary. Overall, they're just missing too many pieces. And what's going to happen is this is going to prevent them from being able to bring in those pieces at some point or another through free agency, right? They're going to have to hit through the draft. And with Daniel Jones, they're not going to fall off a cliff in all likelihood. They're going to be a middling team. And the market reflects that, right? Like the Giants are still, you can still find the Giants plus 650 to win the division, right?
Yeah,
There's just not a lot of faith in this team to progress forwards. And personally, I think this was a big mistake for the organization. It's not a shot at Daniel Jones, but I think for what these teams in the NFL need to do is just pick, like, are we good enough to compete for a championship? If we are, then we're going to sign this quarterback. If not, sorry, you got to go in free agency and we're just going to have a couple of rough years. And I think that the Giants should have went with that. The Seahawks one is interesting as well, because I think they're in the same boat in the sense that Geno Smith, like, he had a better year than Derek Carr last year. He's getting less money. I would have loved Geno Smith on some other teams who have the roster that they just need a quarterback in place that can compete. It doesn't make a ton of sense for me for the Seahawks, because the Seahawks have some good young talent. Like, their roster could progress next year, but they're still too far away, where I thought they'd just be better off, frankly, trying to draft and develop a quarterback or getting like a career journeyman. And if they have a bad season next year, who cares? Like, they're built with good talent. They improve their draft stock for the following year. That division is, San Fran and the Rams, I think, are still ahead of Seattle. It just feels like weird moves for two middling teams, essentially.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, Pete Carroll is how many years old? Like
100.
into the 70s. Maybe he's thinking, I don't want to do any kind of rebuild or something like that. We will take our quarterback at 5, and if he booms, then okay. If not, we're going to roll with Geno Smith. Maybe that's an angle there. Yeah, but I mean, the NFC West, we have the Cardinals, who are an absolute dumpster without Kyler Murray next year. I think Kyler will not be ready before some time in October, and then he will probably be limited with his legs. The Rams are resetting right now.
The Rams are resetting for the next decade, basically.
Basically, yeah.
No picks.
The Niners could start Trey Lance in week 1. Don't know whether Brock Purdy is going to be back. So we are looking at a division where even a very young Seahawks team with Geno Smith could probably be competing for a wildcard spot again.
From that sense, I get it. And you get into the playoffs, you have a chance. And if we look at the NFC odds again, it's pretty top heavy, and both the teams at the top have question marks. What you mentioned, San Fran, Philly, I don't know if people realize how many defensive players they have to re-sign or are going to lose in the offseason. You could see a drop-off. So from that point of view, I do think that the Giants and Seahawks are at the bottom of that list. And as I scroll down, you get into Carolina, Washington, Tampa. Like, Seattle should be priced better than these teams, significantly better than these teams, in my opinion. But I still think that they're, I think that there's a tried, tested, and true formula in the NFL for what it takes to build a team. And people saw the Rams break this formula with Matt Stafford a couple years ago. And I don't think that's going to happen again. Like, the Rams mortgaged their entire future and essentially went on like a playoff run where, won a close game against San Francisco, won a close game in the Super Bowl against Cincinnati. And people think they can replicate that. I think you either got to know you have an elite quarterback and lock them up long-term. And if they're not, you got to go cheap at quarterback and develop them and get them in on the rookie deal. And because of that, I think both of these signings are mistakes, even though the NFC, I guess, is wide open next year.
Yeah, fair enough. Agree.
Yep. This has been Forward Progress on the Hammer Betting Network, NFL quarterback signings and reactions. If you do like this video, we got more content coming out over the course of the next month or so. A lot of it will be free agency. A lot of it will be draft coverage, including Friday, where we'll have an episode on the draft, reacting to the combine overall, improvements, betting markets, how they're being shaped right now. So make sure you subscribe to this channel, Forward Progress. And of course, if you do like the content that me and Suma put out here today, smash that like button. Forward Progress here on the Hammer Betting Network. We'll catch you later on in the week.